Well, I hope Eileen didn't walk over tonight. It's really yucky out there on the road.
The roads are weird. This,
Well, they started to peel the pack and then
yeah,
it didn't peel all the way.
well, it didn't help with the. We're getting so warm that
Yeah.
it's slushy. That it freezes hard.
Yeah. Yep, yep, yep. So Andy had texted me and told me that he and Bob would be attending remotely. And he asked me to chair, but I think if Eileen's gonna be there, it's probably more appropriate if she chairs.
Whichever.
You don't care?
Don't
For now, we're looking for a new chair at the next JFOC meeting,
Good.
So where's it at?
the JFOC meeting.
Oh.
Your first JFOC meeting, you could be potentially one chair.
Jump right. Oh, yeah.
Be kind of like me when I had to go to my first JFOC meeting as the town manager, like, oh,
Huh. Huh.
You were in
So
charge.
who's the chair, Bob? Bob the chair? Who's the chair? No, it was
Phil
Mark-
was.
Phil was the chair.
That's true.
How are you, Garrett?
I'm good. How are y'all doing? Wonderful. Busy start to the new year.
Yeah, I bet. We'll be hopping for a while.
Yeah. Antoinette, could you make me a co-host? So, okay. Yeah.
Where's Bob?
Hello, this is Bob. Can you hear me?
Hey, Bob. Yep.
Yes.
All right, good, thanks.
And Andy had work on his eyeball.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh,
They took the.
Why aren't you here in person, young man? Bob Ganuzzi.
Well, check out the pirate look. Yeah. So
Uh,
Oh, well, you know why the pirate's not here.
you gaining sight?
A little bit, so hopefully, but it's hard to say.
I hope so.
Says is the good thing he's wearing his patch. But he has to wear his patch, he said initially, because as it was starting to heal, fluid in his eyeball was starting to return. So he'd go to look and it'd be like if you were looking halfway out of a swimming pool.
Yeah.
And as soon as you'd move, the water would slosh. So
It is
he
strange.
had to wear a patch. Yeah. Because it was making him so dizzy. Yeah, it would make him nuts. Yeah. There you go, Mr. Miller, there you are, I'm telling your story.
so the weirdest thing is try to figure this out. The air is on the bottom of the eye, it looks like, and the water's on top.
Wow.
And I think
Oh.
that's because the eyeball sees upside down. If you remember elementary school, the lens causes the image to be upside down and the brain reverses it. But since all this fluid's behind the lens, my theory is that it's actually I'm seeing upside down there. So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
but anyway, I'm anxious to ask the doctor tomorrow. So, and
So
hopefully
did you buy a pirate hat and learn to say R correctly?
No, actually, they didn't even give me the eye patch. Kendall had to go find one for me, my brother. So.
Wow, that's just mean.
Eileen's not here, since Andy asked me to chair, I think we'll go for it because
I'll shoot her a
is
text in the meantime.
6:31.
It's a fairly easy. 2 subjects,
Yeah,
projects.
right.
But
Sounds
we
good
could still,
discussion.
we could still have, there's a lot of issues.
Absolutely.
Okay. Michael, are we ready? We're ready. Okay. I'd like to call the meeting to order, the Planning Commission regular meeting on this day of the 24th of January. May I have a roll call, please?
Joy McCoy.
Parnell Quinn.
Those attending remotely are
Bob
Andy Miller.
Kaminsky.
Oh, sorry, Andy Miller.
and Bob Ganucci and Katie Souls. Do I have an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
All in favor?
Uh,
Aye.
Do I have an approval of the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of November 29th?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
What, no further discussion?
Open forum? Anybody's got anything out for open forum? Okay. All righty, we'll move on. Discussion. And just a discussion. It says and possible action night, but I'm pretty sure we're just discussing all of these.
Yeah.
So first one, we're going to discuss the changes to application referral policy.
All righty. Well, good evening, commissioners. Thank you all for your attendance this evening, either in here in person or virtually online. Again, appreciate you all attending and your understanding for me kind of being behind on things for this meeting. It's been a busy start to the year, and being out the first 2 weeks of January didn't help. So we have a light agenda, but hopefully some good discussion this evening on a few different topics. The first one that I wanted to talk through is some proposed changes to our application referral policy. This is when we receive a land use application and we send it to outside, non-town of Fraser entities such as the fire district, CDOT, Mountain Parks Electric, et cetera. When we send that application to those various groups for their own review, we've made a couple of kind of internal changes. There is a section in our land development code that details our referral policy. So the intent is just to update what is in our code, what is public facing, to reflect kind of the internal changes that have already been made. So just as a recap or a reminder, or maybe new information for you all, a referral is required whenever we have a major site plan or any submittal in the major subdivision process. So that includes preliminary plat, a final plat, a major amendment to a plat. Below each are each item are the triggers, so what constitute a major site plan? That's any multifamily residential project, any non-residential use, or anything that requires a conditional use permit. Major subdivisions are whenever a parcel of land is subdivided into 5 or more lots or ownership interests. So that could be like 5 condominium or townhome units. Major subdivision is also when public improvements are necessary for that development. Referral can also be required at the discretion of town staff. So typically on minor site plans, we'll at least send that to kind of like the utility providers, electric, Mountain Parks, gas, Excel, et cetera. Any questions at this point?
Well, not a question, just a comment. On the major site plan, we did this back in 2016.
Mhm.
I thought it was on 4 or more units. For some reason, it says 3 or more units.
So I double checked this in our code today. So a major site plan is considered 3 or more units. And that's also the definition of a multifamily. So, single family home, 1 unit, duplex is considered single family attached. And then once you get to a triplex and above, that's multifamily per our code.
Yeah, that way it changed it.
We certainly can,
Well, it was
but
just that because people were coming in with units that were already built. I know there's some coming up that will be doing this, but they're already pre-built and they're 4 units. And everybody has to meet for it and do all that. And it's like, maybe this doesn't make sense, but maybe it is.
yeah, so I guess a clarification is, again, historically, I'm not totally sure what has been done, but moving forward, in general, I guess there's always kind of exceptions, but this would be new units on a site. So if there's, for example, a site with a duplex and they want to build an accessory dwelling unit, and now their site has 3 units, that would not be considered a major site plan because they're not touching, say, the existing duplex structure. All that's really being proposed or reviewed is an accessory dwelling unit. We would consider that a minor site plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what about a subdivision of 4 apartments that are attached? Now they're coming in and subdividing it into 4 separate condo units. Like they have over here, the gray buildings. I don't know what street they're on.
Sure. So I guess you're saying for existing rental apartment units and they're just changing it to condos?
Yeah, like the Mills Apartments did it, not Mills Apartment, but on Mills, there's the 2 sections, there's the 2 brown condos there,
Mhm.
and they're 4 plexes.
Mhm.
They switched into condos. one building had to go through the major site plan and the other building did it later.
Huh.
Didn't have to go through it.
Okay.
Or the gray one down the road didn't have to go through it, something like that.
Well, the condos are not townhouses? Do they
Yeah, they're
operate?
condos, they're four,
So it's gonna be the same,
everything's the
dirt.
same, nothing changes.
same piece of dirt, so it's not really being subdivided.
Right.
The dirt,
And the reason 4-6 in my head is because we have a bunch of those fourplexes all over the Fraser that. I mean, if it needs to go through major site plan, fine, but that, I think that's why we had talked about back then, that's why we were trying to change that.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess it is maybe a little inconsistent in that, a minor subdivision is for ownership units or less. So like if you wanted to build a fourplex on one lot, and say they're all condos or townhomes, sold
Right.
separately, that would be a minor subdivision, but a major site plan.
Right,
And I guess the idea behind that is just, it's a multifamily building, so therefore it's a major site plan, not minor, but,
I'll take it, I'm just saying that I think we were trying to make it easier for the
yeah.
town. Now that we don't have as many subdivisions going through, maybe it's not such a big deal.
Any other comments or?
question,
Sure.
if it's condos, they only own inside the walls, you're not subdividing the land, does that not matter? If
It-
it's condos instead of like townhouses where you're actually buying a piece of dirt,
Mhm.
subdividing a piece of property or
Mm-hmm.
different.
So, yeah, in terms of the major subdivision or,
Question,
yeah.
is that considered subdivision if it's condos
Ye-
instead of dividing the dirt?
Yeah, so the way our code reads is ownership interests. So I believe even if you're proposing, 5 condominium units on a property, that would be considered a major subdivision. Does that answer your question?
It does, it just
Yeah,
makes sense.
right.
It doesn't make sense to me. because
Sure.
you're not subdividing the land, but you're calling it a subdivision.
Right, you're not subdividing the land with condos. And also with condos, you typically have one utility line.
Yeah, Mr. Blanco?
Come on, yeah. One utility service line that's going to the building and servicing all those units versus like townhomes, which would have their own individual service lines.
So that's my question. So if it's just condos, it's still a subdivision, that's my question.
My understanding is yes, just because of the way the code reads with regards to ownership interests, subdividing a parcel into 5 or more ownership interests. So, I can double check this, but
Subdivide person.
right,
Right.
right. Yeah, it's certainly clear if you're doing, 5 lots, each with a single family home, or even, 5 townhomes, absolutely.
And part of the discussion came up because of quarter shares. People were doing quarter shares,
Mm.
4, 5, 6 people in one unit. Right, or 8 shares, whatever they call it.
But it's still just one unit though.
Yeah.
Right,
Parnell.
right, but it's 4 ownerships.
Right, but it's still ownership of one unit.
Yeah.
I think we ought
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
Cleaning up that language eventually if it's
Yeah.
confusing.
to- Yeah. we need to-
Yeah, me too.
I'll look into that.
And so everybody understands what happened back then, and I think it was 2006, but what happened back then is we had a team of people working with us, and it took so long just to get the understanding of everything. We ran out of time and we had to rush it. I think you were with us, weren't you, Michael?
I caught the tail end of that.
Karen, Catherine Todd was with us.
Right.
And we were just about to get into everything working. They were like, nope, we got to finish. And they just gave us the document. I'm like, now what?
Yeah.
We'll catch things as we go.
Yeah, and we have been.
Could I ask, could everybody pull their mics up to themselves so we could hear you? That'd be great.
And make sure you're on too. The green light should be on. There you go.
You all missed my
Yeah.
legal.
That's better. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks for that reminder, Andy.
Yeah.
So in talking through some of the proposed changes to our referral policy, I think most of these are fairly straightforward. Might be more ideal to hold up side by side what's currently in our code, but you know, the plan is for this to come back in February next month as an actual text amendment to our code. So that'll be easier to see, you know, what's being striked through and what text is being proposed. So right off the bat, our referral policy says the water provider and the wastewater provider. You know, we would instead just strike that and say the town public works department. And, you know, internally, what we are doing is having the review of public works director, as well as streets and water superintendent, as well as the public works project manager, especially for you know, larger projects that require development improvements agreements, surety, and things like that. So just, you know, again, making that a little bit more obvious who from the town is involved from public works side. East Grand Fire Protection District, just, you know, we wouldn't necessarily remove the fire protection provider. We would just add EG, East Grand Fire Protection District. They're currently always included on referral reviews, just for everyone's reference. One thing that was kind of interesting is we have the police department, and historically, I don't think we really, you know, have been sending land use applications to Fraser Winter Park PD for their review. You know, at the end of this section, there's kind of a catch-all, you know, that says we can send these applications to any other department or agency. So, I mean, I think the police department certainly falls under that for any sort of edge case. But, you know, I just think historically we haven't utilized them for review. So, you know, it's probably not worth keeping that in our code. And then clarify electric provider is Mountain Parks Electric, just similar to East Grand Fire. Again, clarify the school district as East Grand School District. Another thing is adding a qualifier to that. So, you know, we'd only rope in the school district if, you know, the development is adjacent to their property, in this case, you know, Fraser Elementary, or if more than 2 residential units are proposed. If it's a multifamily residential project, you know, there's the potential for, you know, increased enrollment at schools. So just keeping them kind of aware of those proposals.
Garrett, on that adjacent to,
Mhm.
doesn't our zoning specify a distance from the action rather than adjacent to, or as far as notification to neighbors?
Yeah, it does. I believe it's a 200 feet requirement.
I wonder if we could just make that the same as any other property owner, so.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
If a development is within, you know, the requirements of public notice.
Yes. There'll be no, yeah,
So how would that read then?
You know,
I
I
would
think,
imagine they're gonna be notified in any case, but.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's fair. I mean, they would be notified through the public notice process, but in terms of, you know, sending the development application to someone at the school district for their review and just keeping them aware of it, you know, it could read something as if East Grand School District is to be notified through public notice, they will be included on the referral review. But
yeah,
something along those lines.
yeah, because that neighborhood notification, I think with a full plan review is helpful for them because of course you're talking about access and streets and things that go to the school normally in those cases, so.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. CDOT, right now the language is kind of strange. It says if access to Highway 40 is contemplated. And I think, you know, with any sort of proposal, you know, I think you either have an existing access to the highway or you're requesting one. I contemplated is kind of weird. So we would just change that language again to something like this. Existing or proposed access to AC dot highway. You know, the only one in Fraser is 40, but again, we would just maybe spell it out like that. HTA is also on there. Similar to the school district, there's no kind of like qualifier or trigger to send it to HTA for review. So what we are proposing is language along the lines of if the project proposes a new trail, would impact an existing trail, or has open space that could be suitable for a future trail. I mean, I think that's sufficiently broad, and it gives enough discretion, but again, just to kind of help qualify when or why HTA would be involved.
So Garen, I
Um,
would suggest that it is broad, but it's broad enough that they ought to just be a review agency. I mean, we've got a trail system in town slowly but surely. Connectivity, we may not always recognize that there's a trail need with this property to connect present or future trails without their input. So I'm not sure that there's a reason to just not make them just a standard review agency.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I guess just, thinking about, smaller projects where,
Yeah, true. Or Plex or yeah.
mhm. But, I think we typically have been sending it to HTA always. So, you know, I guess it wouldn't necessarily be a change in procedure, even if we added this language. Um, again, because I think the language is broad enough that more often than not, we would send it to HTA, but,
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah,
but we could certainly just leave it as is.
I take your point on very small subdivisions, and Parnell is correct. We're trying to simplify those. So,
Yeah.
so I think leaving the language as you has it makes sense. So
Well, with the headwaters trails, they should, if the development's gonna impact the trail, headwaters should have had an easement for the trail or it's trespass. If it goes on the guy's property, person's property.
Yeah, and I guess here, impacts an existing trail, um, could be interpreted multiple ways. Like, yeah, if there's an existing trail or easement on that property to be developed, that's certainly impact. I mean, even if the property is adjacent to a trail, like, the properties on along Clayton Court on the east side, that butt up against the Fraser River Trail, any development there kind of by proximity impacts that trail, I would say, even though
Right.
the trail isn't on their property.
So
But-
what say would headwaters have in that?
That's a good point. I guess with headwaters, it's more about um, keeping them aware of what's happening adjacent to the facilities that they maintain.
So one thing
but-
I could see is potentially on Clayton Court, especially once we get this new bike park initiative kind of going. Having some kind of features along the Fraser River Trail where they could come off and have like a little feature just to help it attract people to go continue biking down to our downtown area.
We'll need to cut down some willows because the people walking on the trail are already getting run
What I'm
over.
saying is if somebody wanted to do like, instead of the land dedication or the fee in lieu of land dedication for like parks, if they wanted to dedicate some space for like a small little pocket park that could have like a trail feature on it or something.
No, right. I'm all for trails. Don't get me wrong,
That's just a scenario I could think of where,
Right.
Maybe a new trail could be proposed on a new development.
I know the other referrals we have, like we send it to Baseline or Merrick. Do any of these referrals cost money or are they just complimentary referrals?
My understanding is that typically no. And maybe I could be mistaken on this, but an entity like a CDOT or HTA or East Grand Fire, my understanding is that they don't bill the applicant or the
attorney.
town for that matter.
About the town attorney.
The town attorney, yes. Yeah. So similar to Baseline and Merrick planning and engineering. Sorry.
No, I said, okay.
Yeah. So the last two, assistant town manager, that's not currently listed. We just felt it'd be a good practice to add it there. If any project is requesting, economic incentives or, things of that nature. So just kind of spelling that out in our code. And then town attorney, legal review, it wasn't very well defined for what project types we would, seek that legal review. So again, looking to kind of spell that out in our code. All project zone plan development, that's Grand Park and Rendezvous, all annexations, any appeal of an administrative decision. So let's say, a minor site plan is just administratively reviewed. It doesn't have to go before planning commission or the board. Let's say a minor site plan is denied for whatever reason and someone appeals that, then that application for an appeal would be reviewed by the town attorney. And then all major subdivisions. I think kind of the reason behind that is helping to verify things around chain of title, previous plats and things like that. So, when you have those larger subdivisions, those can sometimes be a little tricky to navigate.
You might want to put on 9 assistant town manager or manager. Just in
Yeah, I
case-
mean, we could probably
just in case the manager's on.
well, we could leave that
town
out.
manager.
I mean, it could be a future, depending on how things go, it could be as we grow, a future community development director, it could be an assistant town manager, it could be the town manager. We could eventually have a
No, I just
economic
get-
development,
I was just thinking
director.
if somebody's gone and then somebody says, well, why are you reviewing? it? You're not the
Yeah.
assistant manager.
Mm.
Right.
Or, oh, we had to wait because the assistant manager's not here.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's
all right. As
fine.
long, I'm just making sure we have that power so somebody doesn't get hung up.
So on number 10, did you review that with Kent?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, this has
So
been.
that's what you felt like was appropriate.
Mhm.
Your attorney?
And then I guess speaking to the assistant town manager, I think I left this off because I think that's the last slide, but town manager is always included on referral reviews as well. Again, just more so of, keeping Michael aware of developments,
Yeah.
not necessarily from this perspective of, providing review comment.
No, right. I
but,
don't
um,
expect him to review. I'm good with the assistant. I just,
Yeah.
in case she's on vacation, he, it, whatever.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, so Parnell, I believe, and Garrett, isn't it true that there's a time window that all these review agencies have to meet? So, I mean, we don't want anything unnecessarily delayed, as Parnell is saying, but I believe we have that outlined in the code that everybody just has a certain amount of time to complete their reviews. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Our code says, I believe it's 16 calendar days.
right.
Um,
So it'd be up
So-
to the town to find somebody else to review it. I mean, you're right, Parnell. We want to make this timeline predictable and reasonable, and we got to stick to it too. So,
Right. That's all. Thank you, Andy. That's what I was trying to point out.
Hey, Garrett, this is Bob Ganussi. I assume that you skipped over number 4 because it was a duplicate of number 2.
yes, I apologize.
You went from 3 to 5, and I looked at it and I said, well, so really we have 9 items here that you're proposing, not 10.
Yes, that would be correct. Thank you.
All right.
I don't know who else got that head cold for 2 weeks, but it's brutal.
Yeah.
I'm clear. I'm good.
I believe, yeah, that was my last slide. So I appreciate the comments. I think, again, just to summarize, outside of the earlier discussion around, definition of major site plan, major subdivision, including East Grand, whenever they would be triggered for public notice, maybe not including the language for HTA, and then potentially modifying the assistant town manager, just be a little bit more inclusive, or,
I do think though, keeping HTA in there is appropriate,
Yeah, I'm good with it. I just,
because it just keeps them on the radar. Very seldom do they comment, but
Well,
they'll
it's
know
always,
what's coming down the pike in case
and
there
it's
is.
always, it's always good to explore opportunities as the property owner who may not think about trails. you
Right.
know?
Right.
Yeah.
So why not?
trails don't take
Right.
away from the open space and they don't impact it. I mean,
And you
Very
could
good.
offset your land dedication fees.
Yeah.
Or land dedications.
Right.
For your project.
I do think we're going to have to in the future have a larger discussion about connectivity and public trails. And Parnell and I have differed about this, but I think that we look at connectivity of streets in town. Nobody has a problem with that. But I think as we really drill down on being a pedestrian oriented community, we've got to look at connectivity of trails too, or we should. So that if we've got two trails coming on either side of just a simple example, two trails coming on either side of a project, we want to connect them. And it could be, and if we had an ordinance that helped hopefully I think trails are becoming popular enough, and developers are understanding that they're an amenity and not a deterrent, not a detraction from a project. I think that's probably not going to be a problem, but it is a problem if we have a developer that says, no, I don't want these two trails connected. And then it compromises a system in town that we're trying to develop so people can, instead of getting in their cars, they can get on the trail. So, and that's a larger discussion, but I hope we can have that in the future. So,
And Andy, we're on the same page on that.
well,
My thing is personal property rights versus towns wants. If there's something for the person that owns the property, then the trail makes sense. If it's not, then it doesn't make sense.
well, certainly, Parnell, but if you've got a connection that's needed for the community, it's that balancing act between property rights and community needs. And it's always going to be a tough one. But as a community, we've got to make sure that we build in a fashion that's sustainable and it builds for the future. So, and I agree with you. There's a lot of property right, but it's we're all sharing our space here in Fraser. So
That's true.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that, because that is a great point, Andy, but as a reminder to everyone, our comprehensive plan update process that will be starting very soon. We have an RFP out which closes in 1 week. And part of that comprehensive plan will be a transportation element, streets and trails, and looking at new connections. And even though ultimately the comprehensive plan would just be an advisory document, for example, if we have a map that shows, desired new trail connections in town, and then let's say a property where there's a desired trail connection, we can kind of use the comprehensive plan to kind of try to get that connection made through the development of the property. There's not really an enforcement mechanism with the comp plan because it is an advisory document, but if we had, that kind of, proposed trail map, if you will, something like that could be formally adopted and potentially used for kind of a greater enforcement measure, if that makes sense. But
I just hope we eventually give as much importance to trails as we do to streets. I think that would show an attitude towards the future and towards how we get around and how we recreate. That would be, I think that's the level of respect that they deserve. So.
And Andy, something that I have yet to dive into is the HTA's master trail plan.
Right.
Which could be a good reference tool as well for this. And I know that that's something that they're looking to update as well. So it could be a good reference document for this type of review.
Might be able to use some of that as a overlays just to see how that fits with our comp plan.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, certainly part of the comprehensive planning process would be to use any existing plans as reference first before, recreating the wheel, certainly. Okay, so that's all I had for this item. So again, the plan is for this to come back in our February meeting as a formal text amendment ordinance. Not a resolution, right? Ordinance. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to discussion of possible changes to the land use review fee schedule. You want to hear it.
All righty. So another fairly brief presentation, but I'm sure we could, probably talk all night about this. So the intent is just to initiate a conversation around updates to our fee schedule. They haven't been updated since, I believe, 2018, when our land development code overhaul was last completed. So a few kind of areas of concern. Some application types include both a fee, which is non-refundable, as well as a deposit, which is refundable. Those deposits are, the reason we have them is to cover the cost of outside reviews. So, Merrick, Baseline, Whitmer. My understanding is that we have not been very consistent in enforcing or requesting those fees. I think, in the past, some land use applications have not paid that deposit. So then any costs associated with, Merrick, Baseline, Whitmer reviews just get invoiced directly to the applicant. But really how it should function is, if a deposit is required, obviously those costs for those consultants would be billed against that deposit first. Ideally, that cost is less than the deposit, so that any remaining could be refunded. Also, another kind of concern that I've heard is the unpredictability around the cost of those reviews by outside consultants. So, currently we don't provide kind of a cost estimate at the time a land use application is submitted. Moving forward, that's something I would like to implement, even if we don't make any changes to our fee schedule. Just to help hold those kind of outside consultants a little bit more accountable. I mean, an estimate is just that, an estimate. But just, it's better to have that up front than just some invoices, land on your desk on a monthly basis while your application is being reviewed.
Well, I don't think we need Baseline. Merrick, I have questions about, because they're a major firm and we could get an individual engineer that's far less expensive than Merrick to review the plans of people's. So here's my, here's my issue with this. Guy goes out, Muse, Bison Boys, they go out and they develop a property and they have an engineer design their project. Water, sewer, walkways, all the stuff that Merrick needs to look at. The structure of the building is none of Merrick's business. He shouldn't be looking at that. It's just the ground. Merrick comes back and gives opinions of what he thinks should be changed different. That's not his position. Their position is, does it match the code? Does it work in the system? Yes or no. What I've seen is people getting 15 to 20 referrals back and forth between Baseline and Merrick. Oh, we don't like this. We don't like, well, if they're going to stamp the plans, then we can use them. But if they're just reviewing the plans, they're stepping over the engineer that designed the project to begin with. And some of these bills have been, what I heard, $12,000 to $30,000 for reviews from just Merrick, and then Baselines is on top of that.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that's true. You're hearing stuff from people when they're angry. So
I can speak to at least the baseline costs in a little bit, but I will say a couple things with regards to kind of your first comments. I think one thing that we've changed maybe more recently, since maybe like Paul has been here, is to kind of consolidate the referral comments so that they're coming from the town and not those consultant partners, and that they're coming together as one package. So you're not getting, Baselines on Monday and then Merrick's on Wednesday, and it's kind of separate sets of comments to keep track of.
right, and comments are fine, but revisions are different. And people have been getting revision.
Mhm.
And that's, to me, stepping up. That's not what they're hired to do. And when I go and search engineers online, Baseline shows up as an engineer, not as a land planning company, not as a town staff member. They show up as engineers. We have two engineers referring back and forth to each other about another engineer's work. So what's the point of having them engineer it? Why don't we just say the town engineers your project for you and here's the bill?
So on that note, yes, Baseline has engineers in their staff. We are only utilizing planners at Baseline in our reviews. Again, I can speak to what we are doing right now. maybe something different happened.
Well, there's planners that are a lot less expensive than baseline review plans that are good planners.
Mhm.
The thing is, when you have a large company with 50 to 100 employees, they need to bill so they can pay for all their stuff. I mean, if you looked at the bill closely with what it's going to cost us to do Clayton Court, just the review, just the engineering to come up with it, which I don't think we need the electric chargers over there because they take up prime parking spaces, but that's a different issue. The cost of that is outrageous because they have 6 people reviewing their own people's work at $150 to $250 an hour.
It's not multiple people reviewing the work, Parnell. It's one person does the review for certain types of projects. Sometimes you'll have multiple people who might be on an invoice because somebody may be out of town or sick or family issues. They have some level of cover over, and they have good communication. They stay in communication with each project, and that's at the town's expense for that administrative cost.
Well, again, that's we the people's money getting spent on an engineer, and those are expensive engineers. That's my point. We're paying so much money to engineers and consultants that it's making the project unaffordable to do, and it's making it unaffordable for the town.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
I thought Baseline was an interim planning service for us until we had a planner. What's the
That is
status
My
of
question too,
Baseline?
what do we need?
That's correct. That's how they were hired.
So what's the status report on that, Michael?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Andy. It's something that we're still working through, trying to understand, like looking a year ahead at the future development. The hybrid model seems to be what is a good use from a lot of mountain communities. We are having Garrett running point on a lot more things, such as presentations, initial reviews. For example, there was a duplex that was just built up in the Critters. And that cost for legal, Merrick, and the baseline review with some review from our internal staff was about $5,000 for a duplex, which I didn't think was terrible. It requires time to review these things and check the code and make sure they're building it within our code and those requirements. But right now, until we have a more defined approach, really being able to pull from these subject matter experts as we need to is kind of a good base. Garrett's doing a great job with planning, but he is new to planning. And as far as from my point of view of ensuring that we're doing a good management of development in our community, it's something that we're still looking at. One thing that I would like to strongly visit and recommend is if we get to the point where like a downtown development authority is passed in April, I think it provides a good scope for that for a community development director position that could function as the executive director of a downtown development authority, work with those local business owners, work with that development to keep enhancing it, utilize the funds, the plan of development, but also look to overview the planning and have a good base. So, one thing that is inevitable is people come and go. We hope to have Garrett for 15 years, but if we have a planner that leaves, we got nothing. We've got, I'm not a planner. Then we're looking for somebody who can do planning services in the interim. So, I mean, having that base, I think is a good sustainable model, especially as we start to transition more of those review costs to our internal staff. And then we're maybe looking at some more minimal costs through these types of referrals.
Well, if the person that we work with, go ahead, Andy.
No, it was me, Bob.
Oh, sorry about
I think my understanding was just that Baseline was an interim type solution to not having a planning staff at all. Well, we got Garrett now, and I think Garrett's doing a great job. He's hit the ground running, and he's doing a good job. But you don't have a lot of staff, as far as I know, Garrett. So you still are going to have to depend on Baseline for some assistance in review. But over time, maybe the question is, how much of a staff do we need in-house to do these reviews versus having consultants on the line.
Well, Bob, we did all
That's
of
the-
Rendezvous and most of Grand Park with Catherine and Alan. That was it for the staff. They did all of that subdivision. They seemed to do it just fine, and that was a fast-moving subdivision.
So,
Well,
Parnell, you remember, I mean, all of us remember this debate about an engineer is age old, and we did have engineering reviews of Grand Park. And you mentioned having a town engineer, and Michael alluded to the fact that we don't, and we all know we probably don't have enough to hire an engineer, and so that becomes more expensive. So we have to trust our staff, our manager, and all the people that he works with to balance this expense. Is it cheaper, unless it for the town and the developers to contract this work out, or do we get to the point where we hire an engineer? But we've certainly always had contract engineers all the way through all of these projects, and that's because we've never really been of a size where we could afford to hire a town engineer. So
right.
I get where you're coming from, Parnell, but I think that we just, it's hard for us to have enough time, and you've been spending some time, and I appreciate that. I'm trying to determine what these expenses are, but that's why we have a manager. That's why we have a staff that we have to trust to make this
I
as
understand that.
cost effective for the town and the developers both. So.
American Baseline's contracts were signed hastily and quickly because we were in desperate need of an engineer and a planning department. So I think there might be better options out there for us and that aren't as expensive and aren't as big. And
When does
just
their
like
contracts?
Well, just like Baseline could lose, just like we could lose Garrett, the people that Garrett works with Baseline, those people could quit and we start all over. They got to go relearn our code. They got to go relearn everything we're doing. So it's no different than having an employee here. I've looked at their bills. I see what they're charging and they're astronomical for what's getting developed. That they're making it almost impossible to make workforce housing possible in Grand County. Not just Fraser, Grand County. Between the engineers and the government and all the stuff that we keep adding on to them, the cost of building is up 30% over what it was in 1995. The government cost, not materials, not labor.
Yeah. So, one thing that I would point out too, that I've been thinking through, because for me and for previous managers that I've worked with, you're constantly thinking through the scenario. What if I lose an Antoinette? What if I lose a Garrett? What if I lose a Paul Johnson? You're constantly kind of working through those scenarios, and when somebody leaves, it is a vacuum. It is very difficult to work through those times with that. Once we have Victoria Village phase 1 complete, we can have some housing units that can be dedicated for a first right of refusal with the town and actually be able to advertise some housing with these positions. We've had a lot of challenges getting people here who have the relevant experience. This is something that Winter Park, Granby, and ourselves deal with on a regular basis. And this is not a new model. I mean, this is the same model that Winter Park is using. Granby is, they are publishing an RFP for contract services to support their staff as well, because when you have large ramp ups and development and you have these required timeframes to refer or respond to applications, it's challenging and pressuring, our previous planner, for example, Catherine Trotter.
No, right. It was way too much.
It was not a smooth process
No,
for her.
right.
It was a very stressful process for her. She needed help and she never got that second planner or any kind of supporting agency helping her with that. And it was needed.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It was absolutely needed.
So that when we're talking about like Garrett going solo with I think he's been here now for, was it 7 months we said earlier today?
5.
5 months.
Yeah.
5 months. He's doing a great job, but at the same time, having responsible planning and development and review, I think is a good priority when we're constantly talking about the concepts of smart growth.
I'm okay with that. I'm just saying we got to put them in their box of this is your position. This is what you do. It's not bill whatever you want because
Yeah.
you're now a government.
And
you
I'll,
can
I'll look
charge
into
whatever you want.
Merrick. Baseline, we've built a good box with.
Okay.
And I'll talk to Paul about Merrick's left and right limitations and see if there's any areas there that we need to kind of trim the fat on and say, you need
Right.
to focus here, make sure it's in line with our code and our checklist.
And like the building department, this is a good place we could do collaboration with. We could get Winter Park and Granby and all have the same engineer and the same planners
I was gonna ask that.
company working with,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry. Katie, you
They're
were-
struggling with capacity as well. They're actually adding, I can't remember if it was I think it's a building inspector or an additional planner to their team, in addition to having the support from an outside consulting agency. With
Kind
them.
of Winter Park.
Yes.
Yeah, Town of Winter Park.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If we can use the same consultants, maybe that makes they
Mm-hmm.
can live here locally for one, and the fees could be cheaper. And I totally agree with us needing housing for the people that work for the town.
Yeah.
If they can buy it or rent it at first and then buy something, right?
I could encourage a more robust conversation with the town of Winter Park and maybe the town of Granby, and look at if there's ways that we can really combine some services. I talked to Keith about that, and they they have a lot of development on their horizon. Granby has a lot of development on the horizon.
It might not be for 5 years that you can talk to them, but we should at least put it out there.
Well, and I've had those conversations with
They
Keith.
run into the same challenges.
They
like
do.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have with staff. It's not a job that one person can do.
Well, I'm just,
Do you need, it's one person with support or 2 or 3 people that can tag team.
because it used to be you paid, and I don't remember the number, let's say it's $10,000 for a duplex, right? So you came in, you put in your $10,000 and that started your thing. That was the only cost you had, was $10,000, was your engineering, planning, and then you were set loose to go build, right? And then the inspections, they'd come in and do the inspection. That $10,000 or whatever actually is, I don't remember what it was, covered all your bills. Well, now it's the $10,000 plus the $12,000 bill, $30,000 bill.
So let's take a look at our fees. I'll reel it in, and bring us back to our topic, because that was a good discussion.
Yeah,
But
thank you all.
Move on to the schedule we have.
It.
When was the last time that our fee schedule was reviewed? Do you know?
I want to say 2018 when
Okay.
that's the last time our land development code was overhauled kind of comprehensively. So I think our fees have been static at least since then.
So over 5 years or
It's been
so.
It's been longer than that. We do need to update the fees.
Yeah.
Or figure out what they should.
Yeah,
be.
it could have been a work that was adopted in 2018 from 2017.
So and recognizing that the other aspects of development and construction have increased over that time, materials, labor, et cetera. The point of this is not to add further burden to the developer, to the applicant, but again, really to be more predictable and more consistent with what the outside review fees actually cost, and make it understood that cost, make that cost known early and upfront in the process. So going through this, there are some pretty large discrepancies. So what we have is various land use application types. The middle column is a rough average of baseline's review fees from that project type across the past 2 years. And then what we currently charge as our fee. So I mean, for a minor site plan, again, that's something like a single family home or a duplex. We only charge a $50 fee for review. Baseline on average has been in around 2,500. And again, Merrick typically is involved in that review as well, is my understanding. Certainly not to the extent as they would be on maybe a larger project, but just I mean that's really kind of a big difference there. Less so with a major site plan, sketch plan as well. I mean, I think across the board, our fees are lower than what Baseline's review costs are. I think
So
it
I'm
was
sorry, Garrett, is this baseline review fees, or this is what the town's paying and we're only charging what's on the right, or?
Or is that what we're being charged on the right, and is baseline billing those amounts to the applicant?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the town fee is what is on the right, and then Baseline what they're invoicing is in the middle. So
Invoicing who?
the developer, the applicant.
Okay, gotcha.
So yes, for something like a major subdivision and site plan, our fee is based on how many lots or units you create. So when you see preliminary plat minimum 900, it could be higher than that number, but at a minimum, our review fee is the town of Fraser fee is 7,800. Granted, 5,000 of that is the deposit. So I guess really the way that line should read is a 7,800 fee / deposit to the town of Fraser, and then baseline on average is billing, 7,900 above and beyond that because you subtract the $5,000 deposit from that middle column. Does that make sense?
And also from the 12,900 or?
So for major subdivision and major site plan, you see on the far right of that row, major subdivision deposit of $5,000. That deposit is meant to pay for review fees from baseline or other entities. So really that 12,900 amount in that row,
Gotcha.
you can subtract 5,000 from that because
And I'm sorry, one other question, this center baseline review fee, is that include engineering or is that just planning fee?
This is just planning from baseline.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Is there a renewal process for the supporting agency contracts, like an annual review of the contracts for baseline?
They're supposed to.
Yeah. I believe we do have that provision to review annually.
So I think it's a timeline of like 3 years. You may have looked at it more recently than I have. With the option to extend it. So we're not there yet where we would need to renew the contract, but I can find that information out and provide it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mike. I think you said 3 years first and then
The option to
review.
extend twice or something for 2 more years or something.
I was just
Yeah.
reading those today. I didn't get a chance to really
Right.
dig into them.
So before Catherine left, this center column didn't happen. In other
Correct.
words, the cost to a developer before Catherine, when Catherine was here was $7,800. Now it's 7,800 plus 12,900.
Well,
And then minus 5,000,
Minus
just to
5,000.
clarify. Yeah.
But still dramatic, real dramatic increase.
yeah, I mean, when we did smaller developments, Andy, that would add $3,000 per lot if you did a 5-lot subdivision.
Yeah.
Well,
Doesn't sound like that lot until you got to engineer it and then
Yeah.
sell it.
Parnell, to your point of reining these outside, and these are like indefinite quantity, indefinite delivery contracts. You have them for 3 years. Whatever work we dole out to them, they perform. And usually they're not tied to any particular cost on a project. But I liked Garrett's idea of maybe taking a look at these different types of land use, and particularly in the like major subdivision, major site plan area, maybe we need to, before we turn them loose on working on one of these projects, an application, we ask them for their cost estimate for doing the work.
Right.
And then you can kind of monitor that, but as I understand it now, we just hand them the project. They do whatever amount of engineering they think they need to do, and they send us a bill. So maybe on the larger projects, it would be advisable to ask for a cost estimate up front from baseline.
Yeah, and Merrick as well, as Katie Solz said, but yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think even if we don't make changes to our fee schedule, I think at a minimum, that should be our practice moving forward.
Well, I think it's obvious that we need to make changes to our fee schedule. It seems to me like the fee deposits at least ought to be close to what the costs have been.
Yeah,
And then, like I say, we can reimburse them
right.
if they don't run into those costs.
Right. It's kind of the thing of, maybe the marginal pain of paying more upfront is worth, not having those monthly invoices kind of come into your inbox and hit your pocketbook. But I, it's tough. I am sensitive to, again, the cost of construction and development and don't want increased fees to be an additional burden. But I think the reality is if this is what we have been invoicing the developers, then they have been paying this. So I know it kind of cuts both ways.
Paying under duress and paying it because they think they should are two different things.
Right, that's fair. So I mean, a couple more data points that I need to do some more research into. Yes, I've only been here 5 months, but has there been any sort of trend in lowering of baselines invoices over that time? I think the answer is yes. I think last year Rob did a presentation. I'm not sure if it was just to the board or to Planning Commission as well, but the other thing is that the review fees or the fees that the town charges, so even like pre-baseline, that fee, I think historically, and this is probably true for every municipality, the fee that's charged for a land use application does not cover the cost of staff time to review, even if that staff is all internal.
Right.
Right. So the logic is, you know, the expense to review a land development application is not ever going to be 100% covered by some fee that gets paid by the applicant. So the town kind of subsidizes development, whether that's good or bad is, debatable, but I think that's a reality for basically every municipality. So raising our fees to match the true cost of review, I think would maybe be atypical in that sense. So like, for example, to just increase the minor site plan fee to 2,500, granted, that 2,500 is just baseline, it doesn't cover Merrick, but maybe that may not be the best strategy or plan, I guess is just what I'm trying to get
Right.
at.
And I'm not holding you or Michael responsible. These are deals you got brought into.
This is a challenge.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm
absolutely.
not saying that right now is the perfect process. I've had several conversations with Keith since I've been town manager about like any thoughts about having a more combined, planning and mainly just talking about planning department or engineering review. And he just kind of gives me this deer in the headlights kind of look, because they are dealing with their own challenges, huge annexation that they're working through. Granby's looking at a ton of development that's going to go on in Granby Ranch from Fanch's project. And I mean, even if you had internal teams, you're going to have these spikes of fluctuation that come through. And maybe that's just part of the animal, but I agree. I mean, in a perfect world, we have this done in-house. And it's something that's worth talking about and having
Yeah.
discussions about. Not saying that this is the answer.
And I agree with you. I've seen Keith and I've seen Ted and you all look just about as stressed as you can be. So I get that everybody's working and trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
I'm just,
What
Well,
about,
and Fraser, go ahead.
what about like a flat fee for some of the less complicated matters? Like, variance or maybe flat fee instead of,
yeah, like the minor site.
yeah, some of
Right.
the small things and
Yeah.
just say, hey, this is a flat fee.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what I guess we don't do that now in terms of the fee up front and then the review fees invoiced afterwards. That is something that we could do where, let's say our review fee for a minor site plan, we increase that to 2,500, and whatever it costs for baseline to review that, if it's less, we would refund, but if it's more, then
I guess I was thinking from baseline's perspective to try to do a flat fee deal with baseline.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Well, the only problem with this that I've seen over my time here and digging into this stuff is, since we went from in-house planning to outsourcing where we're billing per the hour, per the tenth of an hour. And, I sign these checks to Baseline and they have broken down invoices of what each, what projects are related and what each, the total accumulation for their total invoice. And we went from in-house planning services that had these flat fees, but it very much encouraged poor applications because we would bleed all over these things. Review, engineering review, planning review. You need to make these corrections. Whew. They'll correct a tenth of them. They'll correct a quarter of them. They'll address some of them, but not all of them. And this is what we're constantly seeing this. So I think our applications are getting better since now they've been held to the wire of you're paying for each hour of review. So if you submit a new set of plans that has a couple of the same issues with it that were addressed, but your engineer didn't address those comments, we're re-reviewing those things and you're kind of wasting our planners' times, our engineers' times, and your money and your time. So we're trying to really drive quality applications. And when we give you these comments, it's important that you review these comments and that you address them on the first go round. And that's something that we've integrated into our pre-application process that we've been working with them, is trying to provide an estimate for what they can expect for certain fees for Baseline American legal review, but also just so you know, this is the process, and it requires, when we provide that first round of comments, that we want you to address these comments, because if you don't address all the comments, we're just gonna say, you didn't fix these here again, and it's just kind of a back and forth thing. So if you have a flat fee, sometimes it can lower the quality of your applications, which just wastes time and money from the town's perspective.
So,
Yeah,
or
that's something to think
if,
about.
it's kind of like the fire department, I mean, they have their flat fee, but if they have, like, if Dennis has to go back in
Mhm.
because they didn't meet all the requirements from his previous
You have to pay for
inspection,
his
then they
time.
get charged for his time.
Right.
So that's something to consider too,
Yeah,
an
good.
incentive for people to stick to
Yeah,
a dollar amount, which will be a lot higher than what we have right now.
yeah, and
But that if the applications are incomplete and they haven't met the recommendations from the town to meet code, that
mhm.
And
That makes
if
sense.
they
'Cause
want to
I've,
resubmit, it's gonna cost them another,
Yeah,
'cause I've seen exactly what you
$1,000.
said. Because we've been at the planning here, and they brought in a plan that had 20 red marks on it. They took off 4 of them,
yeah,
left the other 16, and so we still had to talk about those 16 again because they're on the damn plan.
yeah.
well, there'll be
Gosh darn plan,
10
sorry.
So it's
conditions with
wasting people's
approval.
time.
Right.
And to make that return to us, that requires more attention or staff attention,
Yeah,
a chunk of change, $1,000. Okay, or 500, depending on what they started from.
So to that point, increasing the fee, and that fee covers one round of review, right? So you submit it, we provide comments, you address those comments, and we check them, and then you resubmit, and we check that the comments are addressed. Anything beyond that, additional rounds of review could be invoiced just monthly outside of the upfront fee.
The only thing I was gonna say on the minors, or not the minor, but the sketch plan. We had several of those that come through, and we as the planning commission caught a lot of issues on those site plans with it, which helped. So maybe we look at the site plan before we send it off, so the client has a chance to go back and say, oh, you're right, we didn't have a 30-foot setback, it was 25, we thought it was 25 and not 30. Right, we didn't plan for a sidewalk. Right, so we would catch that before they start spending money with Merrick or.
Our planner would catch that before us. Hardly anyone on the planning commission would catch something
Well,
like that.
we've
on
had
the
some
site
really
plan.
top-notch people on the planning commission, so there are,
Folks that
Yeah.
might catch that.
So
well, Garrett would probably catch
anyway,
far
we-
more than we would.
Yeah, they still, cost them something to
yeah.
No,
bring
right,
it to this level.
And Parnell, to that point, yeah, certainly I don't doubt the the abilities of folks on the planning commission to spot things like that. I will say our code states that before an application can even come before the planning commission or the board of trustees for that matter, referral comments have to be addressed.
Okay.
So
That-
there
that's-
has to be at least one round of, we've reviewed this, provided comments, you have addressed them and returned it back to
Okay,
us.
that makes
And then it goes before you all.
You know, it's just the way it should be. I mean, you're right, Parnell, we're pretty good at this, but none of us are paid to do this, so we don't
No,
have
right.
the hours and hours it would take to meet that. But one other thought, Garrett, I mean, if I went out into the town streets and started talking to town residents and told them that we're backfilling development costs, which I recognize we're doing, I doubt we'd find anybody. I bet there'd be a couple guys down at Fisher's that might come after me for that.
Couple.
I do hope, you know, and I've always hoped in service to the town that real estate and development pays its own way. And it's because I agree, Parnell, if we have high costs for real estate and developers to develop real estate, they're going to have to charge high prices. But in the end, we have no control over what they do charge and what profits they make. And it's a pretty lucrative business, at least these days. It has been at times not a lucrative business, and there have been a lot of people through this town that have lost their shirts doing it.
Right.
But I think at the heart of it, the only way we can all continue to afford here in retirement is if the costs are kept to the point where we can afford that. And if the town's backfilling development costs, things are going to get pretty wild as far as the way the town's got to come to us to get its bills paid. So
No, and I agree, Andy. You know, the people doing the development should be paying their own way. It's just they shouldn't be overpaying for what the town is requiring. So
yeah, no, and I looking at this sheet here and seeing how much it's gone up since Catherine left and we brought on baseline, it is pretty terrifying. So it kind of makes me wonder if we weren't, in some ways, we weren't meeting the mark back then, I guess. But and you know, and to Michael's point, you know, in a perfect world where there's just a steady stream of things coming through the town hall, Michael and the staff could plan for staffing for that. But it's like a restaurant where you've got one breakfast cook and several cooks in the evening, because you know that's when everybody's coming to eat. But we can't afford to have just the guys in the evening. We've got to have full-time employees. We bring somebody on, we've got to pay them for every day they're there. So it's a tough one with this up and down development cycle, and really the only way realistically for a small community to meet it is to work with contractors. But as Katie was saying, I think, you know, you guys have all been talking about combining efforts with the other communities to see if we can't meet more of it with staff rather than with contract help. So
And just so everyone's just a reminder, last July, you know, we brought to the board that was approved for various costs through baseline and Merrick that would be town administrative expenses. And those expenses range from 30 to 40% of baseline's costs and Merrick's costs. So I mean, the town is, we are trying to help, you know, address the problem. Additionally, I had one more thing for that.
But that's not-
There's no markup here as well. So the column on the right provided some revenue stream to the town. Where the column on the left, you know, anything that's not expended is basically paid back to the developer. There's no markup on any of this cost with Baseline or Merrick or Whitmer. We're really just, it's like a nonprofit approach, I guess, to this kind of thing. So trying to be as reasonable as we can while making sure that they are paying their fair share for development. But yeah, I mean, if we can work towards having this completely in-house, whether it's with the town or Fraser or combined services, that's something that I continue to have conversations with these guys about. And I'll continue those for sure.
well, and like I said, just the fees are what the fees are, but they should be, as long as everybody's kept in their their square box or their circle, whatever you want to call it. Because I've seen some things where it not so much baseline because nobody knows what they're doing, but on Merrick's that they had argued for 5 hours with the other engineer. This is how we want it, not yours meets the code. You're good to go. We want it this way. So why do you want it that way? So you have two engineers billing one client, trying to see who has the biggest brain. And that's why I really want Merrick and Baseline to be in a very tight box. This is your only job. If it meets this, that's all you say. If it doesn't, not your opinion, this needs to be fixed. Here's why it's wrong.
I haven't heard those complaints
Yeah.
in the last few months.
Well, I'm talking from the beginning till now, so it's not.
Yeah,
not the
and so
last few
that,
months,
that's,
got it.
it's a good point. I'll sit down and like, we already have a planned recap for, Coslick on Main, for example, and that whole process and what can we do to do better?
Yeah.
Because we're gonna have more developments like that on Clayton Court, right? So, and something I would even suggest is, you know, if we want to look at the next closeout of a project and kind of bring that back for a real life recap of what those actual costs were for that project, whether it's a single family or triplex or whatever it is, that's something we could do on a quarterly basis or some type of frequency as well.
Just
So-
being more transparent, I guess.
So the baseline review fees average, that doesn't include Merrick's costs or our legals.
Nope.
So our actual costs probably are at least 50% higher
The
than
developer's
that
cost.
baseline.
We don't have any engineering deposit,
No.
correct? So that, I
But-
mean, so
But
just so
who
you know,
pays for-
this,
Just the town just pays for. sucked
well,
it up
this,
and-
this would be a credit towards any invoicing with Merrick Baseline. So it's not, these are, yes, directly planning fees, but for the major subdivision and major site plan right there in the middle,
Mhm.
for 12,900, if it ends up costing 11,000, then we can apply the remaining $1,900 towards any Merrick and engineering costs.
So just to clarify, Michael, right now our deposit is only 5,000.
Right.
So like what this is saying is,
Right,
That-
if we were to adopt your fees as well.
sure, yeah. Okay,
So at this stage with the baseline, those dollars under baseline, that would be something that we would be looking at for increasing our fees to. Or have you come
at
up with
least
a
the
number?
deposit number.
Good.
And that's just for baseline.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
well-
sorry, I mean, I think the intention of that deposit, so again, 3,000 per minor subdivision, 5,000 for a major, that can cover the fees from Merrick and Whitmer if there are those reviews. But clearly the cost of what Baseline is invoicing is higher than those numbers already. 4,500 versus 3,000, 12,900 versus 5,000. So.
If I could suggest too, I mean, you've got apparently some input, Parnell, from some specific instances. I think that town staff and all of us would encourage an open door policy where these specific instances are brought to the attention of the town staff. And we've let engineers go in the past for these type of things. And if we need to look at a review of Merrick or any other engineer that's doing that, this stepping outside of, again, we need well-defined boundaries. You're exactly right, Parnell, but bring these things, these specific things, to the attention of staff and then they can be solved and prevent more problems from occurring. So.
Yeah, I do. I tell them to call the staff.
Well, they're aware of these issues. I mean, they have these every Thursday. Garrett and Paul, with the baseline comes on first. They have about a 15 to 20-minute overlap with Merrick, so they can have a collaboration, and then it's a handoff just with Merrick's review of engineering, and that's all administrative costs and meeting with our staff.
Mhm. Yeah, and also to that note, I mean, again, when the town planner position was vacant, I have to imagine there wasn't a whole lot of oversight. Michael and Paul can only do so much from the planning side of things. So something that I'm striving to do over the months ahead is really, see those invoices from baseline drop. Because I feel myself taking on more work, so I know that they should have less. But recognizing that they are still a necessary resource for me, for town, to review these projects appropriately. But the hope is over the coming months that with more oversight on my end, that what they're invoicing drops.
Garrett, have I handed you invoices from Baseline asking you, like, we got to work on getting these down?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And now
Yeah.
I'm getting them as they come in, so not retroactively seeing them, weeks or months later. I'm starting to see them as they come in, so can be more proactive on that.
And Paul
It's
starting to do
really
the
good to
same.
hear.
So
Yeah, good.
every invoice that comes down for any check that typically I sign, is reviewed by Baseline, is reviewed by Garrett. All the American invoicing is reviewed by Paul. And any questions about anything, they can reach out to certain staff as they need to, like a project manager or utility superintendent. So we're trying to tighten it. We're tightening the box as we can, but I'll dive more into, we've had a lot of focus on Baseline's box, and we'll dive more into Merrick's box and just make sure that's solid. And yeah, hopefully there's a better solution maybe in the future, but otherwise, from an operational standpoint, to meet the needs of these services and to provide these services adequately and sustainably, this is a model that works. Not a perfect model; it's an expensive model, but it does work. And as we continue to drill down these boxes, I think it could be a good sustainable way of moving forward. And it was only until I think after I became town manager that the decision was made to bring on a planner. And because I think when we worked with Baseline initially and did that contract, the idea was just to outsource it and for development to pay its own way, not knowing what those implications really were.
And we need that knowledge base that a town planner brings. And so I'm really glad we're doing a hybrid model.
I think it's working fantastically. I agree.
I guess the last question is that, aren't those numbers in the middle of the column really enough to cover our costs?
I can certainly come back in February with information on Merrick and Whitmer's
Yeah.
review costs as well.
Yeah, and just to see what is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
true costs for
Mhm.
the town, and then
Mhm.
you decide, well, just how much really should we be absorbing? And like you say, Andy's point about development should pay its way. A lot of people have felt that way for a long time, so,
Absolutely. I understand.
and we need it,
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's
but
been a
not a
hard,
lot of it.
it's a hard pill to swallow when we go from in-house to any kind of a hybrid or outsourcing model. I get it.
Well, and what it's done is it's made us take a look at the real costs. We had Catherine working her friggin' tail off,
Yeah.
and it never reflected the real costs. So,
Right. And we've had a planner. I mean, Jeff Durbin was a community development director for a while, and he had a planner underneath him for a period. So it's nothing that we haven't looked at or used in the past.
well, good. Well, thank you for putting that together.
Yeah. So that's all I had on this, just to kind of recap. So we'll come back in February again with more information, certainly on Merrick and Whitmer's costs historically, and start to look at proposing a flat fee that covers those costs up front, and would just cover one round of review. But again, we'll come back with more data and more discussion around this.
All right, we'll move on to our last topic, maximum height and density in land development code.
Alrighty, so I don't really have anything new to discuss per se on this. The point of this agenda item is simply to summarize kind of what this commission's preferred changes were based on the conversations we had in November and October of last year, ahead of our joint workshop with the Board of Trustees on the 7th. So should be fairly brief here. So these are the changes that I anticipate proposing to our current density bonus. So as a reminder, right now, the density bonus provision only exists for the Riverwalk District and the Victoria Village overlay. The discussion with Planning Commission was to expand that to our other two zone districts that are the same, highest density of 20 units per acre. So that's business and high density multifamily residential. So, and in the multifamily residential zone, we could only allow that density bonus to be met through the provision of deed restricted affordable units. If you recall, in the Riverwalk zone, that can be met through the provision of ground floor commercial. I think having that provision in the business district makes sense. Certainly there's some undeveloped parcels. The business district allows for commercial uses or residential uses, but giving those properties and those property owners the flexibility of maybe the same two different options as are available in the Riverwalk district. But again, in the residential district, commercial uses are either a conditional use or not allowed at all, so it wouldn't make sense to have that provision there. And then as far as the deed restricted units provision of the density bonus, we would keep that at the same AMI requirement as in the Riverwalk district. So as a reminder, it's 120% in the Riverwalk. It's 80% in Victoria Village. And that requirement is 20% of the total units. So if you're building 10 units, 2 of those have to be deed restricted affordable.
The bringing up Victoria Village.
Yes.
Since we just saw that last little presentation. Their biggest problem with being able to do what the town wants, which is our needs, which is the housing that's missing, not the housing that we have here, because we all have 2-bedroom units. Every complex has 54% 2-bedroom unit. So the housing we're missing is studios and 1-bedrooms. The reason they're not able to do studio and 1-bedrooms is 2 parts. One, because of the parking. The parking requirement makes it almost impossible. You're better off doing 2 and 3-bedroom units, because for a 2-bedroom, it's 1.5 spaces, and for a 3-bedroom, it's 2 spaces. For a studio unit, it's 1 space. For a 1-bedroom, it's 1 space, or 1.5. So it gets it more, you have a giant parking lot instead of a shared parking lot. And since we're trying to incentivize people to have fewer cars and less cars on the road and walk more, the smaller parking lots, the less people are going to own cars. If you have parking lots where they have to rent a space or pay for the night, they're not going to bring up their second car, right? They'll figure out how to use the buses. The other problem is the I forgot parking. What was the other one they brought up? Not the open space. They could work around that. Oh, it's what a unit is. So they're restricted to 20 units per acre or 40 units per acre if it's workforce housing. If they got the parking corrected, then they still can't hit the numbers they want to hit, because instead of having a 3-bedroom unit that they could rent for $3,700 a month, they only have a studio that they can rent for $1,200 a month. They need 3 studios for every 3-bedroom house, or they need 1.5 or 2 studios, 1.5 1-bedrooms for every 3-bedroom house. And that's when we talk about what a unit is. And I looked this up. There's 2 houses in Grand County that have 4 kitchens and a single family house, considered 1 unit. There's condos up here that have 2 kitchens in them and they're considered 1 townhomes. 2 kitchens in them that are considered 1 unit.
I thought our code says something about 1 unit means 1 kitchen.
Yeah, but you have your downstairs kitchen with your grill outside, and then you can pull it inside and cook. You have your downstairs setup where you have a bar and it has a hot plate and an oven, and that
People turn into a second kitchen.
And we are subject to, any zoning that was in place in the time for 70s and 80s when a lot of different units were built that may have these second
these are units that just being built now. I mean, there's one house in Grand County that has a bunk room that sleeps 16 people.
I would just ask, are they in the town limits of Fraser?
Some are, some aren't.
Okay.
I haven't been able to get into every house. I do my best.
I don't know what that means, but okay.
Real estate agent.
Yeah.
Well, it seems though that Parnell, we got this number 2, that once the density bonus is met, there's no upper limit on units per acre, subject to other zoning requirements. So that kind of gets rid of the restriction on units. I think you're that helps then. And then your point on parking is really well taken. I mean, one way to get around that is, you get a unit and no parking space and you can rent a parking space.
Right.
And we reduce that so that we can get these, you're right, we need these housing unit that can house one employee basically, or a couple.
And I do know we do need some housing that's families and
We've got it, a lot of it. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't know if you looked at the report, but the question on the survey was how many people live with you in your unit or your house? And people would say two. Well, it was two friends. So they put that as a couple on the report that says it's a couple. So they're thinking family. Well, it's not. It's two people that are forced to live together because they have nowhere else to live.
Mm.
So they have to
Well,
live
they
with a
can't afford
stranger.
to live.
Right. Or they can't
themselves.
afford to live. Right. Correct.
Afford,
So afford.
yeah, not a
Sorry.
family.
Go ahead, Megan.
You guys are good. These conversations
Hey,
are
Megan.
awesome. Hi,
And it-
Megan Luther, 307 Eastham. Just one of the things that's been brought up before too, with the deed restriction, totally get it. I don't know if it's possible to either compromise like affordable, can you also, and or workforce housing? Because I think we bump up to a lot of issues with AMI, right? People just either they make too little, they make too much, whatever it may be. But what we are looking for is actual workforce. So can we define maybe those parameters instead of just solely basing deed restriction on income? I think that might help our community a lot more than just black and white numbers.
Or we need to look at that AMI and that ratio. We've talked about that in the past. So as it's just our income level for a lower income person is high because it takes that much money to live here. So
Yeah, right.
And with having that restriction on, it has to be, full-time residents.
Right. They have to,
And
so many hours.
They cannot be short-term rentals.
right.
I think it should be a minimum of 60 hours a week. That's what I had to work
Yeah,
when I was a kid.
me too.
Yeah. Different times, different people. But
Yeah.
yeah, just
But
something
so
like
how to adjust
hours
that.
per week of, and they'll mix and match, right? Because it's like lifties or
Mhm.
people that serve, it's not necessarily one business, right? But they'll work 40 to 60 hours a week because they'll pick up bar shifts at 4 different restaurants or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
So I didn't hear what you said either.
No,
sorry.
so you're focusing on a unit's AMI versus the tenant's AMI. Is that what you're saying?
Either way, I think that the tenant's AMI, because you're deed restricting it based off of what was that used to qualify, I guess, or quantify? 120% of AMI, was that who can live
Yeah,
there?
so I mean, you don't
Well,
want
that's
to
what
kick
they
somebody
thought,
out of a unit, if you have 120% AMI, they meet those requirements when they move in,
Right, that's what I'm saying. They're like a compromise. It could
Yeah.
be this or that. Like it doesn't need to just be AMI. It could be like, okay, if you reach you fit in this box with AMI, cool, you're good. Or it's workforce
Mhm.
so that you don't exclude one or the other. Because I feel like we do have a broad spectrum.
Yeah, and just something I would point out is the Riverwalk district did just publish in our zoning code because of the timelines and such. The only one thing that's updated based on our last meeting is the boundary areas will reflect the housing partnership areas. And it does focus on those things. It focuses on the unit AMI and those working requirements. So
From the
having affordable units that
housing
require people that are working 30 hours a week at least.
Yeah, I just think affordable means different things to different people.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Yeah.
better
Thank you,
able to
Megan.
quantify that.
No, thanks,
Huh.
Megan. And
So, but back to so 120% of it. And if so can someone just set their rent at whatever the 120% of AMI is? And then open it up for anybody that wants to live there, but this is how much it's gonna cost? Kind of how it works,
so
huh?
our current requirements is it on the unit? It's on the unit, correct?
So,
Yes.
I'll look it up too.
that doesn't,
Yeah, same requirements.
2-bedroom at like a 128.
huh,
Isn't it the AMI of Colorado? It's not Grand County specific, is it?
No,
It is Grand County.
It is
but
Grand
yes.
County. Okay,
Yes.
that's good, at least.
Yeah, so that's CHAPA. If you Google CHFA 2023, rental income limits, that'll pop up on a chart and it's by county.
Michael, I gave you a document last time we met. Did you get a chance to look at with that?
I have it on my desk.
It's a weird law. I came across it.
Yeah, we'll make sure
Yeah.
our verbiage matches what's required there.
There was something about low income housing and the state had written a new law in 2022 or 2021. And I was reading another document and just came across it, and it says if you put in low income, then your medium income has to be 60% or less. And I'm like, well, that's not what we're trying to do, because we need a larger gap.
So
So how do we do it to label it so that there are different rents that are geared toward people with those different AMIs? I mean, 120% or less is what I know we all decided on, because we've got people in those ranges, but it still doesn't prevent a landowner from just charging that 120% flat on their units, right?
Well, the way we could set it up is if I'm at 60% AMI, then the maximum you can charge me for a 1-bedroom or a studio is X, right? So if they can't find other people to fill it that are in the 120, then the 60% person gets the house. And what we're going to see, because other communities are seeing this, is corporations are buying blocks of units for their own employees, and they don't charge them any rent. They just don't pay them as much.
So it's a good point, because I could ask, the Bison developers, Kozlik developers, for their units. I mean, if someone applied for their deed restricted unit, which is set at 120% AMI, let's say someone applies for that and their AMI is at like 80 or 90%, do they then charge them the 80% maximum rental price? I honestly don't know. Or
Charge the flat bedroom rate.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
No?
Their performance is based on the rent that they can receive. So if they're gonna say, I'm gonna charge you $1,000, but you get this other AMI where the rent is only $700, that's a $300 loss per month to the developer, who is probably depending on that for their pro forma. It probably does not work that way.
Yeah, that's my guess as well. So that is a good point. So this is from Fraser River Valley Housing Partnership, the study that they did, I think, in 2022. And this is in the entire Grand County. So I had this in our meeting in November to point out that roughly 3/4 of renters in the county are at 120% AMI or less. However, it's a good point that, well, half of them are 80% or less. So we're creating, deed restricted units at 120%, someone who's at a, say, 80% AMI income level. Yes, they could get that unit, but then I believe they're being charged the 120% rent price.
So maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a split. Yeah, I don't know. Rob, what do you think about that? You're listening out there?
I'll look at our agreement with Coslick as well and see
Yeah.
what the requirements are in the agreement, because I'm just reading this. For the purpose of this section, affordable housing is defined as housing for a family that has an income at or below 120% of the area median income as determined by Grand County by the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, which is CHFA. As housing for a family. So it seems like the 120% is applied to the unit. So it covers if, 120%, let's just say for a 2-bedroom is going to be, I don't know, $1,600 a month. I'm sure that's not correct. 32 at 120% AMI.
Yeah, that was the slides. Want to go back?
Okay. Okay, so I'm off. There you go. $3,200. So that's the rent for this unit. So if you make 80% AMI, but you can afford that and you're willing to pay that price and be in a lease agreement, then that's great. That's like Antoinette was saying, the developer's going to charge the highest price they can for that rent for their pro forma, especially if they're looking at selling the building. If they want to sell the building, it works to their advantage to have the deed restriction at a higher AMI rate. They're not going to charge somebody less rent based on their income. It's this is solidifying the cost of these affordable or workforce housing units. So that you have some that are not just market rate, they're cut down, required to be deed restricted at that 120% AMI level. So they can make more. They can make 160% AMI, and this unit is providing housing for that family at 120% AMI. So it's just setting the rent control on the unit itself,
Right.
not for who's living in it.
Could, it might be too hard to math, but could we set it up so
Right.
that if you charge 120%, you have to put a parking lot. If you charge 80% or 60%, you only need 1 parking space or 2 parking spaces instead of 20 parking spaces. I'm using odd numbers just to,
Yeah.
so nobody gets a thought in their head of what we should do. But
Interesting.
maybe you get a density bonus by not having as much parking or less open space because you're willing to drop your AMIs to a lower level. And those units would be deed restricted at 60, 80, and 120.
Well, parking is very expensive.
It's $38,000 a parking space.
I think it's 45 is what we have.
Well, I should go up. I guess that was 2018.
We need to have a legitimate Price is Right.
That's an interesting idea you got there.
Yeah, that incentivizes
that
that
way.
lower, because people that are at the lower income usually don't have a car. Right, so that,
Or if they do, they have one.
right, that they share with everybody.
Yeah.
Just thoughts. I mean, because it's,
Yeah.
the idea is to get a wide range of housing.
Right, and somehow to incentivize that.
Yeah,
I would recommend leaning on this comprehensive plan update for their focus on the parking, our current parking requirements, and then looking at what are some good things to implement there.
yeah.
Because they're good ideas, but having a firm come in with experience about what works and what doesn't work, I think it's going to be a good approach. Because I think right now we're just not seeing a lack of cars. I mean, if anything, we're seeing cars being parked at our public parks, and
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's-
even at Victoria Village, for a lot of times we have to enforce that.
Mhm.
There's a chain running across by Victoria Village to prevent people from parking there and from moving their snow there. There's abandoned vehicles all over the place by the railroad.
Well, some vehicles aren't abandoned. They just don't run today, and they.
Or parts
Well,
of
and for
There's
some people,
Teslas out
instead of
there
a
that aren't
$2,000 repair, they go and they buy a $1,000 vehicle. So,
Right.
it doesn't really.
Hmm.
Megan has a question, whoever's.
Interesting.
Sorry, Megan Luther, again, just to that point with Michael, like your guys' comprehensive plan, I don't know if it is worthwhile or if you have, like, we're one of the last ski areas to develop, right? So like, where did Aspen go wrong? Where did Steamboat go wrong? Like, what do they wish they would have done now that they're grown to the size that they've grown? Maybe insight there instead of thousands of dollars to outsource on another study too, just asking some of those questions as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, certainly.
That's good. Do a
Thank you.
steamboat. Maybe we could all take trips together and go check out the ski areas. Let's go.
Well, and that'll be part of the evaluation criteria for whatever firm the town's going to go with for the comprehensive plan update, is having relevant experience.
Yeah.
They can kind of pull from those lessons learned and know what the current trends and where things are going. Because yes, we definitely have that advantage to learn, which is something that we take advantage of often.
Yeah.
So no, it's a good point, Megan.
So go ahead, sorry.
Okay, I guess, and we'll talk about this more, but in terms of these, this bonus, do we want to have it just 2 units must be at 120%, or do we want to say, split that up, one at 120% AMI and one at 80% AMI?
Some kind of scale of sorts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but your idea too for creating an incentive for the developer to make that decision is a good one also, but it,
And
so
something
with
that we
those costs at 120%, they, like you say, they're not affordable.
Well, something we talked about was basing the density on the AMI. So 20% of these units are going to be deed restricted. If they're going to be deed restricted at 160% AMI, then you get 25, 30 units to the acre. If they're gonna be deed restricted at 120%, you get 40 units per acre. If they're gonna be deed restricted at 80% AMI, then you get 60 units per acre, you know, that's something that could be visited.
But that required the parking to get less because
Right.
because I got to have a meeting with Matt and Todd after the thing because I was so vocal about the numbers. And that was when we really got down to brass tacks, it was the parking that throws it off. So building A is all your studios and 1 bedrooms, but we always do this backwards in Grand County, so it's great. Buildings D and F are going to get built first, E, D, and F.
Mhm.
A, B, and C get built later, but building A they have to do it on the far side by County Road 8 because they can park it. If they try to do it on the other side, there's not enough room for parking, so that's why the other buildings are higher families, and the studios and 1 bedrooms will be over by County Road 8 because that's where they can make the biggest parking lot. So if we could have a better mix of units in there if we figured out a different way to do the parking lot. And since we're not doing LIHTC, LIHTC holds you to certain standards for units with bed cars.
But we very well may be going the LIHTC route.
We
and
might be, right,
Even for like a 4%, which is 30% construction
Yeah.
cost versus the 9%.
right.
These
So-
are stage one. so-
Clearly, we don't want to hamstring the town for a 15 or a 50-year commitment for $500,000 a
We're
year.
looking at a master lease on that building one or A site anyway.
Well, and like Greg and Kevin, the Bison Boys, as I could call them, just easier. The Bison Boys, they have a way of doing their money stack too that's different. And we met a guy that's doing a large project here, but he's really good at finding financing for people. And so we're trying to meet with him this month to see what maybe he can help Matt and Todd figure out a different way to do it. Because investor money is so expensive right now. To go borrow money from people that normally would donate to, or not donate,
Yeah.
but buy into a project,
Uh-huh.
8% is where they start for interest. They want 8% plus a kickback, not a kickback, but a premium for giving you the money once the units are all rented out and the building makes sense. So that money's really expensive. And that's why they're looking at $5,000 a year for 15 years.
$500,000.
500,000, sorry, did I not say 500,000?
Yeah.
5,000. You said 5,000.
Yeah.
Could
That'd
I
be a
just
win. I'll take
ask a question? So what are we
Signed.
doing right now? What's our focus for tonight? Are we trying to come up with something to propose at the workshop, or is this not something that we will be discussing anyway at the workshop?
It is, but I wanted to make sure that, so we discussed this in October and November, and coming out of those meetings, this slide is just summarizing what I thought we had consensus on as far as a proposal that we would present to the board on the 7th. And certainly if the board has comments, I know 3 of the people here are trustees, but if the board wants to see further changes, it's a workshop. We'll talk through it, right? But I think presenting something that we can say Planning Commission has consensus on this and supports this is like kind of the goal, the starting point.
So are we now looking at some of the ideas that we've just discussed? Is this slide going to change now, or?
It can, and that's fine. So like Parnell's suggestion, that's something that we can discuss on the 7th in more detail.
So what do you guys
but-
think about presenting? I mean, we talked about AMIs as far as density, like the lower the AMI, the higher the density per acre. What if we kind of throw some numbers up there as far as what that could look like on the residential side for density versus AMI, but also for the commercial side? If you want to, I think, what's our requirement? 40%?
40%.
40% allows for 40 units per acre.
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
So if they did some smaller shop or some kind of additional commercial space, that's 30%, maybe there's a scale there or something like that. I don't know. We could play around with a little bit of a scale, but keep it very simple. And that's, I think, kind of the benefit to this is very simple.
Yes, right. That's why I said I don't want to get it too crazy on the math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I to your point though, Parnell, I think there can and should be some sort of provision to, not meet the minimum parking requirements. I think in November, I also discussed, I think one simple change would be for a studio only require half a parking space per studio. Because right now it is one parking space per studio unit. So I think even just making that change could help incentivize smaller units. But you know,
Realistically, it's not gonna work on the grant. Realistically, 1/2 of a unit,
And we could ask,
if you're entitled to it.
we
is
could
about-
ask the resort. I mean, they just opened a whole bunch of 1-bedroom units.
Yeah, those are all employees right there and they bus them or.
So if
come
any,
load 'em into work
yeah,
and
if
back.
anybody can go without a car, it's gonna be those guys who are at the resort.
Right.
Could I make a suggestion?
yes.
Some of the studios have no parking space and some have a parking space. The ones that are rented with no parking space are rented with no parking. And we can pretty easily track if somebody's got a car through registration, through illegally parked cars around town. And the person who rents the studio without the parking space is less rent. So you're basically paying rent for a parking space.
Right.
So, because I agree, Katie, a lot of those people in the ski area are working right there, but we have a bus system and we are trying to encourage people to arrive here, tourists and employees both, without cars. And there are a lot of young people without cars these days. So,
It's a good idea, Andy.
I just know how hard it was when I grew up, you know. In 1979, there wasn't a whole lot of options of where you could live. Like all the adults were shacked up.
That was the 70s.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, 5 of us lived in a studio unit at Silver Creek. Right? So that, and luckily half of us worked days and half of us worked nights. Some of us worked all the time, but you know, when all 5 of us were at the house, 3 of you had to sleep outside. There wasn't enough room.
Sounds like housing for a lot of people right now.
Yeah.
So I would like to make sure that we have some direction, that
Yeah,
Garrett has some direction for the February 7th workshop.
Yeah.
If we want to present what this consensus has been, I think this is a good starting point for a workshop, and we can have discussions on scale. We can, what would you guys like to see at that workshop?
Well, I like what we have, but I'd like to add in the parking possibilities. It's the thing. And you know, if the town ever builds a parking lot, you have a car and you rent a studio unit with no parking, or 1 bedroom with no parking, you can go rent from the town's parking lot.
right.
Yeah.
I
I
think
think
it's-
I'm also, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think this is a good starting point, though, and
Okay.
with the addition of the parking, because parking is driving a lot of these problems. So,
Mhm. The only thing I'm a little wary of is so item number 2, if we did something like that where there wouldn't be a unit per acre cap, if we implemented that alongside some sort of provision to lower parking requirements, or you know, some mechanism where you didn't have to have the minimum parking required for that number of units, then I feel like the development math could get very wonky. You know.
Well, so that's why. So with every parking space you lose, you have to drop your AMI. So if you get rid of 10 parking spaces, then you have to have 10 units at
Mhm,
80% or
mhm.
5 units at 60%, or some easy math, nothing
Right.
crazy.
Right.
Hard to do numbers in my head or at the table when we're in a meeting.
Huh.
Hurts.
Yeah. Well, that's something I can certainly look into more, and maybe
Yeah.
like provide some examples.
Yeah.
Um,
Because Denver has 0 parking in some of their sections of the city now. There's no parking required for businesses or residential. They all either find a place that you pay for parking or you don't have a car. They have Ubers too, which we don't have yet.
Yeah, and I
We're a
would kind of,
destination resort.
yeah.
People
Yeah.
Here by car.
No,
So
that-
destination, I think, is kind of a key term there. There's a lot of places that you can't go to on the transit system.
right.
You know, we could look at some type of campaign as far as, you know, do a co-loan for a vehicle, you know, with
Right.
your buddy. That could get contentious. I don't know, but you know, just some ideas like that.
Or find a piece of ground that is more ideal for a parking lot. And yes, they have to walk from the building maybe a quarter mile to get to their car, but that's their choice if they want to do that 80% AMI or 60% AMI.
the bus goes to the parking lot like it does in Breckenridge. So,
Right, exactly.
yeah,
I mean, I heard there's some acreage just outside of town that may not have water. It could be perfect for parking. I'm kidding, I'm
They could rent some spaces.
kidding.
So just to move on to kind of the height bonus that we discussed, I think there was a little bit less consensus on that and more, uh, workshopping to be done on this, but what I remember the consensus being is if we implemented something like this, we'd limit the maximum height to 55. That matches what's allowed by right in Winter Park. We would only allow the height bonus in those zones listed there, Riverwalk, business, potentially high density multifamily. As a reminder, the standard or, maximum allowed height in those districts right now are 45 for business and Riverwalk, 40 for high density multifamily. And then the other thing that everyone seemed to be very in favor of is any building height above what's currently allowed would be set back so that you have some kind of articulation and the full effect of that height isn't, felt from the street. There's less impacts to views and things like that.
And my only comment on this is if we give the town something, the general public should be able, that's why I'm for the 55 feet. We gave the Victoria Village 55 feet. Other people should be able to do the same at 55 feet. I like the step back thing for sure, but that's, and maybe you have to put commercial underneath it to go 55 feet. If you're not in the River District or the Victoria Village
Right.
complex.
Well, and again, back to one of my issues, and the setback may well be the thing that helps with this, but other than the rest of Victoria Village is that 10, 15, 20 feet below the level of Highway 40. So it's not a 55-foot in your face right next to the highway.
Yeah, the building in the back
Right.
will be with the daycare underneath, if they figure out the daycare. With the daycare underneath it, that building, I think it's 55 feet.
Yeah. But it's set back.
Right, but it's set
And
back.
lower.
Yeah.
Right. So
It-
somehow with that, I'd still like to have like a distance. It's either setbacks or that 55 feet is,
Because it's when
you
you're,
know, 40 feet off the Highway 40 or.
yeah, it's when you're
something like that.
driving, you notice the height. When you're walking, it doesn't matter if the building's 20 feet tall, 15 feet tall, or 55 feet tall, you don't see over it.
Yeah.
It's when you're driving down into the town, so that's the.
I think didn't we give Cost League a variance to have the sidewalk at 10 feet and then be right on 40, or was that part of our code? Because I know it was tight fitting everything on that.
The building was designed slightly different originally, from what I remember, it was pushed back more, but then people decided that they wanted the building right on the edge of the sidewalk.
Yeah, and that's the big feedback I get from a lot of people too, is if it's just right there.
But oddly enough, the more you walk by it, the more used to you get, because like
Yeah.
Crooked Creek,
Yeah, it doesn't bother me, but
if you walk by the Crooked Creek, it's just as tall, you can't see over it.
I think once the space in there is activated, it's gonna feel a little different.
Yeah,
A little more
Yeah.
warm, inviting.
I
I'd
guess
warn
it's
you
just
if
the
you-
challenge with 40 being, so narrow and they go to, anyway,
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point.
it's
So,
just something to consider that.
yeah, I think because
Yeah.
as it gets more and more done, it seems less and less intrusive. But I think when all the buildings get down below and you actually see something going on,
Mhm.
it'll feel better.
yeah, so some kind of additional buffer setback for the height bonus along Highway 40. And then I think we didn't really reach a consensus around this last point, number 4, about what would trigger the height bonus. Some of the ideas proposed were tying it to the density bonus. So if you meet the density bonus, you also meet the height bonus. We could have it as provision of affordable units, but at a higher percentage. So, right now the density bonus is 20% of your units as affordable. Maybe the height bonus is 30 or 40% affordable units get you that height bonus. Something else is increased open space, kind of the trade-off of if you have more open space around the building, that could offset the impact of that additional height.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I like that thought.
Does anybody not like the idea of height increases? I know some, well, I know, like, like a Parnell, for example, you're very outspoken. I just would like to provide some opportunity for some other input. Just,
So
Yeah,
I
like
think Katie Souls, I'm sorry, was reluctant some because of the loss of views, the loss of small town Fraser. And so on these triggers, I still hope we have some mechanism where we can review specific site issues there's all sorts of great modeling. We can see what buildings look like on the site. Victoria Village is a perfect example. We've already cited it sits lower than the highway. I mean, every site is going to be different. And I think there ought to be some capacity for the town board to be able to review what it's going to look like on the site and whether that site's really suitable for a 55-foot building. So I think about our neighborhood, and Parnell, you and I have gone back and forth on this. We chose to be a business neighborhood a long
Right.
time ago, but a 55-foot building goes in next to a one-story house. It's going to be kind of the proverbial cathedral sitting next to the skyscraper in New York City in a way.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some mechanism where we want things to be predictable for developers when they buy real estate, but there ought to be some review of what these are going to look like in site specific constraints.
Right. And Andy, the thing with we have a single family house with a 45 or 40-foot tall building in front of it. It's the coast, like the little greenhouse right behind that.
Right, exactly.
So it wouldn't matter if the building was 35 feet or 55 feet, their view and everything that's happened to it has happened. And I'm not for height. What I'm for is more workforce housing. And
Sure, and
if
density.
if we have to give up height for workforce housing, that's why I'm for the 55 feet. It's not.
No, I get it. Yeah.
Well, and I guess we could get that also, that works back to the board for review. If they want that extra 10 feet,
Right. If they have
it's not
commercial on
just a
the,
blanket.
yeah, if they put commercial on the first floor and workforce housing, the idea is to have your workers live above your place or next door to it, right? So that'd be the ideal situation.
So this also crosses with our brief discussions in our future agenda item concerning architectural review. And a lot of the language in the Winter Park that they modeled from other communities just gives a pretty good latitude for looking at how things are going for examining how things are going to look on the site and site specific design. So it is important to somehow keep some power to look at these as this town grows. So
Right.
The maximum height to subject 55 feet subject to review. Well, somehow.
yeah, I agree with that. I worry about the, I feel like from the developer's standpoint, if it's kind of open to this subjective review, then why even bother with the cost of going through the design process and showing renderings of what this extra height would look like if there's a chance it could just be shot down and
yeah,
a design review type of provision. But I mean, that's certainly something that other municipalities have. But yeah, so I do think it's valuable and we can require, those like additional submittal items. I just worry about having latitude to just shut it down and say, okay, now you have to redesign your project at 45 or 40. And the cost that you had to design it at 55 is a wash now, but
So now, one question I had too was so 45 is our height for business, but 40 is for multifamily,
for the high density multifamily residential,
and the high density means how many units?
20 units per acre. Same
Okay.
as business in Riverwalk.
It does seem to me that should be 45.
That's totally fair. Yeah.
It seems like that's stepping originally from 45. I like keeping the single family residential at 35,
Mhm.
and in those, try to maintain those residential areas. Just talking with some folks that just
Yeah.
recently moved into Old Town Fraser, which is, at least our street is still residential, but it's multifamily on the other side, but it's not high density.
Where the trailers are now,
Yeah, where the,
I think that is,
Vanna buyers,
I think that is high density. I think that's multifamily high density.
so is that at 40 foot?
That'd be at 40 or 45.
If it's high density multifamily, then it's 40 feet.
So if it has
maximum.
20 units, they don't have 20 units down the street. So low density, multifamily. If
35.
If
Yeah.
that's what's allowed in the residential areas with low density.
Low density multifamily district is 35 for the maximum height.
Okay,
But what is the,
Good.
what is that row of trailers? 'Cause I thought that was high density. It was purple at one point.
no, at Mill Avenue? That
Yeah,
over there?
Mill Avenue, yeah.
No, I think that's still, I think it's still.
In the Riverwalk district or?
No,
Because
just the
St.
height.
Vincent's, when they built their
Oh,
place,
Mill Avenue.
they went for max height on their garage, and I think that was 35 feet.
Yeah, but that's a single family house and that's just outside the trailer. park.
Well, they're actually zoned multifamily, that block is,
Yeah, but
and they have 3 units.
I'd have to go look. There's a different zoning at the trailer parks. There was a different zoning and then it changed as you went down that road.
Yeah,
So I think what you're talking about is medium density
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
multifamily, because the only high density multifamily areas in Fraser are the Elk Creek condominiums, like along Elk Creek Drive and Doc Suzie,
Yeah,
and then the Fox Run apartments.
okay.
So
okay, so medium density is, what's the max height on medium density?
I believe it's 35.
5,
Yeah, I think it's still.
which would
Medium
fit
density
with
single
the
family?
residential.
Or medium density multifamily. So Mill Avenue is half and half.
Yeah,
It's
Yeah,
half
but
of it.
still, if you've got medium, but no
But then
high
you-
density
right.
on Mill.
Right, it's the eastern half is medium density single family and the western half is medium density multi.
I knew it was something weird,
Right.
but I couldn't remember.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's confusing, but still, all subject to 35 feet.
35.
So just
So to maintain that feeling in
mm,
core smaller residential areas of the 35 foot, it does seem to me that we don't need to say 40 feet for the high density multifamily, giving them that extra 5 feet, what allows them to go to 3 stories.
right. And just one comment I would make too is we had the Board of Adjustment hearing back in November or
September, I think,
September.
for the height variance.
Okay.
Yeah.
You could have said a year ago and I would have believed you, I guess.
Yeah.
Putting just one concern I would have is, I don't know, and Katie, think about this from the perspective of you be on the board that's coming to you. I think it puts pressure on the board looking at a height variance for development. And I think you're going to have twice the turnout that you had at that Board of Adjustment hearing for people that have properties on the west side of the highway when you're looking at Riverwalk District at a higher limitation, a height variance for 55 feet, for example. Just something that we just had recently occur that I thought was interesting to recap and look at.
Right.
I guess you're saying if the bonus is subject to design review.
If it's subject to like board approval, kind
Yeah.
of like what you were saying, Katie, I think you're putting that pressure on the board and just, best practice with a zoning code is to have the zoning code be the zoning code
Right.
and leave less variability to personalities that are on the board. Just that's kind of a best practice. That way it's setting the expectations so the developers know what they can and can't do. And if they want to, look at a higher height variance based on a higher percentage of deed restricted housing, that could be a route. But I think you're going to need having a little more clear guidance in the code as far as which your options are versus putting the board in a position where they need to make a decision with pressure from a developer or pressure from the community. Could be a little contentious.
Do you know if Winter Park Lodge 2 is 45 feet or 55 feet? I try to measure it, but you can't do that triangle thing because it drops off too fast.
Right. The easiest
You
thing
know,
to do is just to pull up the zoning code, the zoning map that we have, because
Yeah.
it's combined with Winter Park. So you can just click on that building and you can, it'll take you to the zoning code for that. And
Okay.
they likely built to the highest height they could.
Yeah, they did. I just can't remember how high it is.
I
Fine.
agree the process of requesting a variance shouldn't be put into a board of adjustment. There needs to be an easier way to do that for everyone's sake. Is that a possibility? How can that be accomplished? Because comparing Riverwalk and Victoria Village is like comparing apples and oranges to a different part of the Fraser Valley. So there are considerations to be made with each individual development. Is there an easier process of requesting a height variance?
Well, and I think it's looking at the zoning district. So Victoria Village, for example, is its own zoning district, which was evaluated based on that location, which views would be distorted from a higher height. We specifically discussed the change in elevation between the highway and that land. Something that's a little more open and open space versus something that's right up on the road. I think all those things were discussed when we had that discussion for Victoria Village. And typically you're looking at zoning districts individually when you're looking at these zoning changes, just like
Right.
we have for, the medium density single family, the medium density multifamily, low density, high density, all these different overlays that we have are individually evaluated with criteria and good discussions, I think, about what makes sense.
So for one, the 55 feet would only be subject to the specific districts?
Business and the
That's fine.
high density multifamily residential zones, those business and
Yeah, but like what Garrett's talking about right here is the discussions that we had back in November and October as far as, having some of those same benefits in just the business district overall that we've adopted into the Riverwalk district, I think makes a lot of sense.
How about, should we just throw in some sort of a setback distance from Highway 40 for a 55 footer?
the height correlates with the setback.
And the tough one, because you think about like Andy behind him.
Yeah,
The
I think you do it by the district, and if they want the 55 feet and they're on the highway, they can go say 35 feet and then step back 10 feet, so they have a patio that they have a break, and then they can go up the 55 feet.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna,
20 feet.
because if you start saying distance from the highway, now everybody's gotta go out and figure out, well, I'm in the zone, but oh, my front part of my building's not in it, but the back part of my building can be 55 feet. Or, to me, that leaves too much open for us to make decisions that aren't just spelled out clearly to people. But that's a possibility. And it does give people advantage and disadvantage. If you're further from the highway, you're gonna be able to get 55 feet, but if you're on the highway, you can't get 55 feet.
Mm.
So that would change people's idea of what they develop. We may not get the housing.
Well, I mean, again, if the planning commission isn't fully on board with this, we don't have to advance it any further. I am totally fine with that. I thought just given the variance application that occurred back in September, just the main feedback was there is no other way to request that additional height. So kind of the whole point of this discussion was just to try to create that mechanism. But if the planning commission doesn't want to create that maximum or that mechanism, excuse me, and just say the maximum height in the zone is the maximum height, that's fine. But I mean, we can certainly continue this conversation with the board on the 7th as well.
And part of the benefit of this workshop is to invite members of the development community to comment on this because they're a big part of it that it applies to. And, they're subject matter experts in these types of things where we really try to be. But when you're that's something that I've mentioned to a couple developers already. Is like, we're having this workshop on February 7th. It'd be great for you to come, provide your input, because that's valuable too, along with our discussions here at the Planning Commission and with the board. So I think it's a good approach to a good workshop when you have good input from different sources.
Back when we approved it for Victoria Village, I was defending our decision to a citizen because it was a lower starting point or the base of it.
Mhm.
And he said, well, in the future, it's not going to be necessary. If you've made it 55 feet, it's just going to be 55 feet in the future.
Well, the folks in Twin Rivers were like, well, we're at that same level, so
Right.
we're getting blocked by a 55-foot tall building. We're stuck at 2 stories. So if we're at that level, can we go and redesign our buildings, to go 55 feet? That's the kind of,
Yeah.
if you're the distance from the highway, well, okay, then we should all, that section be 55 foot.
Yeah, I mean,
So that's
again,
why I like what we had.
I
Only one voice.
well, so it's not, I think with Victoria Village, it probably wasn't just the elevation of the site. It's also an affordable housing project, right?
Well, it's supposed to.
Yes.
Yeah.
The goal, yes. And, so again, that's why we could tie this height bonus to providing affordable units, because that's kind of essentially the rationale, in addition to the grade and slope elevation change of the site. That was kind of the rationale of Victoria Village, right? So,
Yeah. I mean, we can have a conversation about the workshop
Yeah.
if you guys would like to.
I think it's good. I mean, I like these conversations. So Andy, thank you. And the rest of you for doing this.
I mean, honestly, the more the town can get away from having to build affordable housing and just have good zoning that provisions for a
Right.
good percentage of all housing that's going to be built.
Yeah.
It makes sense for the developer. It makes sense for the community. If
Right.
and when there's going to be trade-offs for things like, visual distortion with your views with that additional 10 feet. But it's all about trade-offs, right?
okay. So I guess I'm hearing it at least still have the discussion on the 7th, but again, if the feedback is to not pursue it further, no harm, no foul,
Right.
kind of thing. So,
Would
No,
you
but
guys
it'd be
like
good
to
to
do?
hear what everybody says.
What would you guys like to do?
yeah.
I think we should continue the conversation, definitely. Because if the town has a rationale for development that the town is doing, the broader community development should be extended that rationale as well for it to be equal. So let us digest this information and think about different scenarios and come back to it because it's worth it, in my opinion.
For my 2 cents worth, I think we should go ahead with the workshop on the 7th, and, basically what you've got here on this slide might be a good basis for us to begin the discussion. But I would also encourage you to work up some of these charts that we've talked about that kind of show how density bonuses can lead to adaptable sites, and density bonuses lead to more affordable housing. And however you wanted to do that in terms of some charts or something like that, just to kind of give a few examples of how someone might approach a site and say, well, with this kind of design, I can put in some 80% AMI, some, and that includes the parking. So, the reduction in parking spaces. So yeah, I would suggest maybe this is the starting point for discussion, but maybe have in your back pocket some little charts worked up for how you might apply some of these step bonuses.
Yeah, absolutely. That would certainly be the intention for the workshop, to kind of work through examples, how each of these provisions would be implemented.
Garrett,
It's
can you
almost
make
the-
sense? Go ahead.
Oh. It's almost the beginning of, defining what a unit is this conversation. So I appreciate all the work that's going into having us discuss this and doing a workshop, I think is a really good idea.
Okay, all right. Anything else to add? All right, well, that's all I had for the agenda.
All right. And commissioners have any other business?
I just had one thing to bring up. On the river walk, reading through the stuff that we have, it says that the commercial's on the roadside. And I thought we were trying to encourage commercial space on both sides, the road and the river, so people could sit out and have a coffee or have dinner and be along the river. I don't know if that works or not, but I thought that's what we were trying to do on that. I know it definitely, we wanted commercial on the roadside, but I thought we were allowing riverside commercial as well.
That's allowed, Parnell. I mean, that was part of the reason for the 40% of the ground floor to be commercial, is to have, different developments are going to come in, for like Bison, for example, they had these townhomes platted already, based on the previous zoning. And we encouraged them to kind of like hold off. We're looking at this. We're trying to figure out what we want on Clayton Court. And we added the ground floor commercial requirement on the frontage.
Right.
To have that more traditional Main Street. I think you're going to have developments of all types that's going to have some commercial and hopefully some patio that goes back to the river.
Yeah, I'd just like to encourage that, because that makes us different than
Right.
anything anybody else has up here.
Right.
Winter Park didn't even take advantage of their, the Icos are the only restaurant that took advantage of the river. The other one's it was a laundromat and has a thing, haircut salon up top, which is really nice. If you go in there, you get to listen to the river while you get your haircut.
Yeah.
But so you had the Icos, and then right across from it, now you have these giant 55-foot tall condos. So it kind of, it's Valerio's now. Sorry, Bob. It's Valerio's. So the Valerio's patio is now blocked in by a giant building. Instead of having other restaurants on the other side of it, it's just residential house.
Right. I'm hoping that we have some more mixed use products similar to Coslig. I think it'd be great. Where you have that commercial space on the bottom and then you have some residential on top.
Yeah. I just think if people buy those lots or think about developing them, we as a community should, take advantage of the riverside too. Make sure have a hallway that goes to the back, and you can have a patio back.
Don't just look at the value of a condo that's on the river. Look
Right.
at that commercial space. Absolutely.
Yeah, I must have missed the allowed part, because I just saw mandatory on the roadside, and then
Yeah, if you were to have residential in the front and commercial in the back, current market conditions, that business is going to fail.
right.
You need to have that front, that visibility from the main arterial to be successful economically. So, but they are deep lots. So, at first we talked about maintaining the 100% ground floor commercial requirement. But when you looked at how large and deep those lots were, that would be massive. You could put a Walmart there.
Yeah. Right.
And versus having a little flexibility, but at least requiring that frontage commercial, so you have that Main Street feel, and hopefully some segments of that commercial stretches to the river.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we can, provide that input on everything that comes across the Planning Commission's desk, and you're going to have that first one here in February or March.
Yeah. I just think
Mark, I do have to agree with Parnell, though. I think you're a little off base, Michael, with the Main Street feel. I think we need the river feel down there. That's been hopefully we could get both. That's a good possibility, but you want to encourage people to get out of the car and walk down along the river and visit these restaurants and bars and the things that are happening down with a nice quiet river in the front instead of Main Street in front. So, and that Clayton Court won't be Main Street. I understand that it'll be a small arterial, but again, we keep going back to this, you got to see it from your car if you want to go visit it. Hopefully we get to the point where people get out in Fraser and walk around and see what they can discover. So.
Yeah.
And the other thing I kind of brought up earlier is
over at the movie theater, we have the 2 charging spaces. They're always left blank so people can charge. But those are 2 of the prime spaces. There's so little parking on Clayton Court. I don't know if that's the ideal place for a electric car charger.
Right, and we were looking at putting that off like on Clayton Avenue, for example, like the side streets, not the primary street where you want that parallel parking to be direct visitors.
Okay.
But somewhere that's off-centered of Clayton Court is what we've been discussing with the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So like something like in the parking lot of like the HTA building,
Right.
or somewhere a little off-centered than on actual Clayton Court itself.
Yeah, just so it's someone, because when you go to the movies, those 2 spaces are always open. And
I wouldn't say always open,
No.
but there's only
Well, I mean,
one
not-
reserved parking
not when
space
there's-
for that.
other than a car being charged, right? Like, because everybody's courteous enough not to park there.
Right,
Right.
and the signage is on there. Don't forget.
Yeah, it's really like at the Foundry, it has 2 charging spots, but only 1 reserved parking space.
Yeah, right.
That's the future, right?
That's it. Well, it was until the snowstorm came through. Now we don't know what we're gonna do. Chicago's definitely rethinking their electric cars.
Yeah, no, mine's parked out front.
Yeah.
We'll see if it starts
Okay,
when I do.
anybody
So
else?
I got a truck and a tow. ready to get you off.
All right.
I'd make
Bueno.
motion to adjourn.
Just real quick, the
Okay.
workshop is actually, just so that everyone knows, is at 4:30 to 5:30. We have actually moved our workshops to before dinner with the board, and we want to extend an invitation for the planning commission members to join the board for dinner at 5:30 after the workshop.
And it's on the 7th and it's here at the town
7th here
hall?
at 4:30.
Yes.
So
Okay.
4:30 to 5:30 in here, we'll have the workshop, and then we'll all have some dinner, and then the actual meeting for the board meeting will start at 6.
Trying to get out early. I think it's good. I think it's a good chance.
We'll try it. So
I just got to make sure I get it in my schedule correctly.
yeah.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second,
All in favor for adjournment?
I.
Aye.
All right,
Signature.
Thank you, everyone.
People,
thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Bob.